In September 1944, the skies over France still smelled of gunpowder and burning fuel. The fields of eastern France were scarred with bomb craters and the charred remains of tanks. After the Normandy campaign, the Allied forces had swept the Germans out of western and central France in a string of brilliant victories. Major cities like Paris, Reims, and Dijon had been liberated one after another. Allied morale soared higher than ever. Many believed that within a few weeks they would cross the German border and end the war before the year was out. Yet to the east, in Lorraine, a broad stretch of land between the Moselle River and the German frontier, one of the fiercest and most unexpected battles of the war was about to unfold. Lorraine was more than just a disputed borderland between France and Germany. It was the natural gateway to Germany's Saarland industrial region, home to vital coal mines and steelworks. Since the 19th century, the region had been a symbol of pride and pain for both nations. France lost it after the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, regained it after World War I, only to see it fall to Germany again in 1940. Thus, when Allied forces advanced toward Lorraine, both sides knew that the coming struggle would be not only strategic, but also a clash of national honor and will. General George S. Patton's U.S. Third Army was assigned to drive through Lorraine, cross the Moselle River, capture Metz, a fortress city with defenses dating back to Napoleon, and then push onward to the Rhine to open the road into Germany. Patton's daring plan relied on the momentum of the rapid Allied advance after Normandy and the collapse of German defenses in France. However, by September, that momentum was being tested to its limits. Supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers. Fuel and ammunition ran dangerously low. Tanks and armored vehicles stalled for lack of gasoline. The famed Red Ball Express truck convoys raced day and night from western ports to the front, hauling millions of liters of fuel. Still not enough. Meanwhile, autumn rains turned the Lorraine countryside into a quagmire, bogging down the very mechanized forces that were the backbone of Patton's fast strike doctrine. The German army, reeling from defeat in Normandy and the Falaise Pocket, retreated chaotically toward its borders. Yet amid the ruins it managed to regroup a formidable armored force under Generals Hasso von Manteuffel and Erich Brandenberger, commanding the German 1st and 5th Armies. The 5th Panzer Army, rebuilt with newly arrived Panther and Tiger tanks, prepared to counterattack. Hitler believed that if Patton could be stopped in Lorraine, not only could German honor be salvaged, but the opportunity for a larger counteroffensive might arise. A vision that would culminate months later in the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes. Lorraine's terrain posed unique challenges. Open plains broken by low hills, winding rivers, and countless ancient villages. Large armored maneuvers were difficult. Tanks were easy targets for artillery and reconnaissance aircraft. The Germans, familiar with the ground, used wooded ridges and small forests to conceal their tanks and anti-tank guns, setting deadly ambushes. Patton, famous for his attack fast, keep moving philosophy, had to adapt to the mud, weather, and restrictive terrain of eastern France. By mid-September, Patton's divisions had crossed the Moselle under brutal conditions after bloody fighting around Nancy and Pont-à-Mousson. Despite establishing bridgeheads, his supply situation remained dire. Then the Germans struck back. On September 19, 1944, the 5th Panzer Army launched a major counterattack near Aracourt. Southeast of Nancy, more than 260 German tanks and assault guns, including modern Panthers and several heavy Tigers, advanced with mechanized infantry from the 11th and 111th Panzer Divisions. Their goal? To smash through the American line, retake Nancy, and drive the U.S. Third Army back across the Moselle. Facing them was the U.S. 4th Armored Division under General John S. Wood. Though outnumbered, the Americans were backed by mobile artillery, M10 tank destroyers, and crucially, aerial reconnaissance, provided by small Piper L-4 Grasshopper planes. These unarmed, fabric-covered aircraft, military versions of the civilian Piper Cub, could carry only 2 men. They flew low and slow, used mainly for artillery spotting and message delivery. To German gunners, they were easy prey, so fragile that many considered them unworthy of a bullet. Yet over Lorraine, one such fragile plane would soon do the impossible. In the foggy mid-September mornings, thick mist blanketed the Moselle Valley, limiting visibility for both sides. German tanks crawled through muddy fields while American artillery shelled suspected ambush positions. Allied fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, were grounded or hampered by bad weather, making the L-4 reconnaissance planes even more vital. Their pilots, often mid-ranking officers, flew at treetop height to locate targets and radio coordinates to the gunners below, sometimes within yards of incoming shells. In this chaos, one pilot, Major Charles Carpenter of the 22nd Reconnaissance Squadron, decided to turn his tiny plane into a weapon. But before Carpenter enters the story, it's important to understand the mindset of the Americans in Lorraine. After Normandy, Patton's men believed the German army was finished, that one more push would topple the Reich. The reality was different. Hitler had ordered his troops to hold every position, while fresh armored divisions poured in from the rear. German Panthers, armed with the deadly 75mm KWK-42 L-70 gun, could destroy any American tank at long range. The American M4 Sherman, with thinner armor, was notorious for bursting into flames when hit. The U.S. advantage lay in superior artillery firepower and coordination among infantry, armor, and air units. Within this complex system, the little L-4s served as the eyes of the army, delivering pinpoint coordinates to the guns behind the lines. Lorraine thus became the meeting point of two military philosophies: American mobility and flexibility against German engineering and discipline. For nearly a month, from mid-September to mid-October 1944, the region saw relentless seesaw battles. Hundreds of tanks burned. Villages were reduced to rubble. Civilians fled as rain fell endlessly. The U.S. press later called Lorraine the land of mud, smoke, and steel. Yet amid the chaos, one small image became legend. Major Carpenter's Piper L-4 skimming low over Aracourt, unarmored, unarmed, except for 6 bazookas lashed to its wings with wire, diving fearlessly at the 45-ton Panther tanks below. At the time, no one, not even Carpenter himself, believed that a light aircraft armed with bazookas could take on tanks. But in the desperate, mud-soaked fields of Lorraine, audacity was sometimes the only path to survival. And it was here, where steel and rain mingled in the crucible of war, that Bazooka Charlie Carpenter carved his place in history, a small but shining chapter of World War II, born from the harsh, improbable battleground of Lorraine in 1944. Before he became Bazooka Charlie, Charles Carpenter was just an ordinary high school teacher in a small rural town in Illinois. Born in 1912, Carpenter grew up in a modest middle-class family, living simply, loving history, and believing deeply that knowledge was the most powerful tool a person could possess.
He taught history at Moline High School, where students remembered him as a calm,
dedicated teacher with a particular passion for lessons about the American Revolution, stories of courage and creativity in the face of adversity. No one could have imagined that only a few years later, this quiet teacher would write his own chapter of history in the skies over Europe. When World War II broke out, the United States at first remained on the sidelines. But Carpenter, like many young men of his generation, felt that the war would eventually reach American shores. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and the U.S. entered the war, Carpenter immediately volunteered for the Army in early 1942. Though no longer a young man, he was in his early 30s, he was fit, quick-minded, and highly disciplined. After completing basic training, he was selected for the Corps of Observation Pilots, a unit that trained tactical reconnaissance pilots to adjust artillery fire from the air. It was an unusual choice. In those days, flying was not the glamorous adventure seen in movies. Observation pilots like Carpenter flew small, slow aircraft with no armor and no weapons. So fragile that, as soldiers joked, you'd be safer behind a pistol than in one of those things. But Carpenter was intrigued. A student of military history, he believed that information was power. A tiny observation plane, he reasoned, could change the course of a battle if it could spot the enemy and relay accurate coordinates to the artillery. After finishing flight school, Carpenter was assigned to the 22nd Reconnaissance Squadron under General George S. Patton's Third Army, a force known for its speed, aggression, and daring commander. It was the perfect environment for a man like Carpenter, practical, bold, and inventive. His aircraft was the Piper L-4 Grasshopper, a military version of the civilian Piper Cub with a wingspan of 10.7 meters and a weight of just 550 kilograms. Its tiny 65-horsepower engine gave it a top speed of under 130 km/h, so low that people on the ground could often see the pilot's face as it flew by. Carpenter's official job was to fly low, observe enemy movements, adjust artillery fire, and report German positions. During the Normandy campaign and beyond, he flew hundreds of missions, often within range of machine gun fire, and several times his plane was hit by German anti-aircraft fire. Yet he survived every time. His comrades said he was different from other pilots, calm under pressure, always smiling, and fond of saying, "Anything is possible if you understand your enemy." That same cool-headed curiosity led him to a seemingly crazy idea, to arm his L-4. To the Army, the L-4 was nothing more than a paper airplane, light, weak, and utterly unsuited for combat. But Carpenter saw one key advantage. Its slow speed and agility allowed it to approach targets from angles that fast fighter planes could not. From there, the idea of mounting bazookas, infantry anti-tank rockets, on his plane was born. The bazooka, officially the M9A1 rocket launcher, was about 1.5 meters long and could penetrate 75 to 100 mm of armor. In the hands of infantry, it was powerful but limited by its short range of roughly 100 meters. Carpenter realized that if he could fire bazookas from above, where German tanks had the thinnest armor, he might have a real chance. The only question was how to mount them without upsetting the plane's balance. In the muddy fields of Lorraine in autumn 1944, he did just that. With help from unit mechanics, Carpenter mounted 3 M9A1 bazookas under each wing of his L-4, using steel wire and aluminum tubing for support. The firing system was rigged with simple electrical wiring connected to a hand switch in the cockpit. When finished, he named the strange little aircraft Rosie the Rocketer, a playful twist on Rosie the Riveter, the iconic symbol of American ingenuity and strength during the war. His superiors were skeptical at first. They saw his modification as reckless and unauthorized. But Patton, known for encouraging crazy ideas as long as they worked, reportedly smiled when told about it and said, "If he manages to knock out something, let him keep doing it." And with that, Carpenter received permission to fly combat trials in Rosie the Rocketer. On his first test missions, he flew low over German convoys and fired a burst of bazookas at a troop truck, blowing it up on the road. The rocket's explosive power wasn't large, but from a steep downward angle, they could punch through the thin top armor or engine decks of armored vehicles. Carpenter quickly found that the best tactic was to dive at about a 45-degree angle, fire from less than 100 meters away, then pull up sharply before enemy gunners could react. What set Carpenter apart wasn't just his flying skill, it was his inventive mindset. He was never one to follow the book. In his journal, he once wrote, "I don't believe in luck. I believe in boldness carefully prepared." His blend of historical knowledge, tactical intuition, and personal courage transformed him from an ordinary teacher into an extraordinary warrior. His comrades recalled that he always flew alone, no gunner, no observer. He handled his own maps, estimated coordinates, took notes, and attacked by himself. On one occasion, after returning from a mission, he calmly stepped out of his plane, lit a cigarette, and said with a grin, "I think I just cooked a cat, not the house kind, the panther kind." From then on, the nickname Bazooka Charlie spread across the Third Army. The American press would later call him the little pilot with the biggest punch in World War II. Interestingly, Carpenter never saw himself as a hero. In a letter to his family, he wrote, "I'm just doing what any soldier should do when he sees the enemy ahead. If I've got something to use, I'll use it. The only difference is, I'm up in the sky and they're on the ground." That humility made his story all the more remarkable. As the battle for Lorraine reached its peak, Carpenter and Rosie the Rocketer were ready for the missions that would make them legends. Yet behind the daring stunts remained the soul of a teacher, a man who believed that knowledge, creativity, and courage could make the impossible possible. In a world where war was defined by tanks, heavy artillery, and falling bombs, the sight of a middle-aged man flying a fabric-skinned plane with 6 bazookas strapped to its wings, diving against 45-ton German Panthers and Tigers, became a symbol of the contrast between mechanical might and human spirit. For Carpenter, war was not only destruction, it was also a test of intellect and resolve. He never set out to prove anything grand, only to make the most of what he had to complete his mission. But it was that very spirit, inventive, unyielding, and fearless, that lifted him out of obscurity and into history, forever remembered by the simple, defiant name, Bazooka Charlie. As the summer of 1944 drew to a close and the Western Front expanded, Charles Carpenter realized that war was not just about numbers and maps. It was a chain of split-second decisions between life and death. As a reconnaissance pilot of the 60th Observation Group, his daily mission was to fly his tiny Piper L-4 Grasshopper over frontline areas, marking artillery coordinates for ground forces below. It was a job that demanded skill, patience, and a streak of recklessness. For though the little plane was almost invisible to radar, it was utterly exposed in the sky. A burst of machine gun fire or a single flak shell could turn the L-4 into a ball of flame within seconds. But Carpenter was not the type to accept the role of a passive observer. A history teacher by profession, he firmly believed that human will and creativity could alter fate itself. That belief made him restless as he watched German armored columns roll forward while he could do nothing but radio coordinates and wait for the artillery to respond. He wanted to do more, not just watch, but fight back. And so, in August 1944, a daring idea took shape in Carpenter's mind: to turn his reconnaissance aircraft into a flying anti-tank weapon. Turning that idea into reality was an act of pure audacity. The Piper L-4 was merely a militarized version of the civilian Piper Cub, its frame made of wood and fabric, never meant to carry weapons. Its maximum takeoff weight was barely 550 kilograms, powered by a 65-horsepower engine so weak it could barely fly against a strong headwind. Yet Carpenter decided to strap infantry bazookas, the U.S. Army's standard shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon, to the wings of his plane. He persuaded a few mechanics from the logistics depot to help him rig makeshift mounts from aluminum tubing and steel tape. The result? 3 M9A1 bazooka launchers on each wing, 6 rockets in total, each capable of piercing 60mm of armor. He named his modified aircraft Rosie the Rocketer, inspired by the famous wartime icon Rosie the Riveter, the symbol of American women's industrial strength and the motto, "We can do it." If Rosie the Riveter represented the power of the home front, then Carpenter's Rosie the Rocketer embodied its fearless counterpart at the front line, a fragile machine capable of punching holes in enemy steel. The early tests were as reckless as they were brilliant. Carpenter calculated firing angles, dive speeds, and trajectories himself. He discovered that by diving at a 45-degree angle from about 500 feet, he could strike the thinner top armor of enemy tanks. He rigged a crude sight from wire and a mirror, and wired a simple electrical switch to his control stick to fire the bazookas. With no manual or precedent, Carpenter became the first man to test a homemade flying bazooka in real combat. His first mission came in early September 1944, when he spotted a German convoy near Nancy. Diving low, he fired his first salvo and missed completely. The rockets exploded harmlessly in a nearby field, but Carpenter was exhilarated. The sound of the rockets whooshing through the air, the chaos they caused among German troops, he felt a new kind of power. Circling back, he adjusted his aim and fired again. This time, a truck exploded in flames. The rush of victory convinced him that his idea was not madness, it was genius. In the following weeks, Carpenter refined his invention. He learned to judge distance, wind, and timing by instinct. He fired individual tubes to improve accuracy. Though the L-4 could carry little weight, 6 bazookas were enough for 2 or 3 attack runs per mission. On several flights, he even doubled the load to 12 launchers, making Rosie the smallest tank-buster aircraft in the world. Every sortie was a dance with death. The L-4 had no armor, no machine gun, and virtually no chance of survival if hit. Success depended entirely on surprise and speed. Carpenter would skim low over the treetops, pop up suddenly, and fire at ranges under 100 yards, close enough to see the faces of German soldiers. Then he'd yank the stick back hard, climbing sharply and twisting away through flak bursts. Each attack lasted only seconds, but those seconds decided whether he would return alive or not. Soon, Carpenter became a legend among his comrades. They nicknamed him Bazooka Charlie, half in jest, half in awe. Some called him crazy. Others saw him as a hero. But no one denied his psychological impact. German troops, who once ignored the harmless little Piper planes, now panicked at the sight of them. Reports even circulated that the German command had issued an order: All Piper aircraft are to be considered dangerous targets. The impact of Rosie the Rocketer went far beyond material damage. It became a symbol of American ingenuity and daring. When Carpenter's exploits reached headquarters, instead of being reprimanded for unauthorized modification, he was encouraged to continue. General George S. Patton himself, famed for his admiration of bold initiative, praised Carpenter, calling him a man who turned willpower into a weapon. Carpenter once told reporters a line they never forgot. Once you've seen a bazooka rocket slam into a tank turret, you never want to go back to just spotting for artillery again. In the smoke and chaos of war, Rosie the Rocketer was more than a plane with rockets. It was the embodiment of imagination unleashed, of one man's conviction that creativity could change the battlefield. In an age of massive machines and industrial warfare, the story of a lone pilot who turned a flimsy reconnaissance aircraft into a deadly weapon proved something timeless. That war is not only a test of steel, but of the human spirit to think differently. And in those brutal autumn days over Lorraine, as the roar of engines mingled with thunder and fire, the sight of Bazooka Charlie's tiny L-4 diving fearlessly into the smoke to strike a German tank column became unforgettable, a living symbol of courage, invention, and the unbreakable will of one man at war. In September 1944, the small village of Aracourt, nestled between Nancy and Lunéville in eastern France, became the fiery battleground of one of the fiercest tank engagements on the Western Front. After the liberation of Paris, General George S. Patton's U.S. Third Army drove eastward toward the German border, aiming to break through the Lorraine region, capture Saarbrücken, and open the road into Germany itself. But Patton's advance was checked by two obstacles: a crippling shortage of fuel and the growing ferocity of German armored resistance. On September 18, 1944, the German army launched its Lorraine counteroffensive, deploying the 11th Panzer Division and the 111th Panzer Brigades, equipped with Panther and Panzer IV tanks as well as Jagdpanzer assault guns, to drive the U.S. 13th Corps out of the Aracourt sector. Under a thick morning fog rolling across the French countryside, German tanks crept forward, treads grinding through muddy roads and waterlogged fields. The battle that followed became a clash between two opposing philosophies of armored warfare. The Germans' emphasis on engineering precision and technological power versus the Americans' reliance on flexibility, coordination, and mobility. Amid this chaos, Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter prepared for a mission so reckless that few would have dared to attempt it. His Piper L-4 Grasshopper, nicknamed Rosie the Rocketer, now carried 6 bazooka launchers mounted under its wings, along with a few homemade improvements to the firing controls. Carpenter flew with the 60th Observation Squadron attached to the U.S. 4th Armored Division, based near Nancy. His official task that morning was routine: to locate German tank movements and relay coordinates for artillery fire. But as always, Carpenter refused to stop at observation. On the morning of September 20th, 1944, as the sun broke through the mist, Carpenter flew low over the fields west of Aracourt. From roughly 1,000 feet, he spotted 3 German Panther tanks moving north along the edge of the village. Through his canopy, he could clearly see their black turrets rotating slowly, searching for American Sherman tanks hidden behind a tree line. Without hesitation, Carpenter banked sharply into the wind and dove at a 45-degree angle, a maneuver others would have called suicidal. At barely 100 yards, he fired 2 bazookas from his left wing. 2 white smoke trails streaked toward the column. 1 rocket missed. The second struck the lead Panther squarely on its turret. A flash, then black smoke rose skyward as the tank erupted in flames. Pulling up sharply, Carpenter circled back and dove again. This time, he loosed 3 rockets in quick succession, hitting a second tank, which shuddered to a halt in the middle of the field. German crewmen leapt out and scattered into roadside ditches as Rosie the Rocketer skimmed past overhead. Carpenter returned to base elated. After-action reports credited him with destroying 2 Panther tanks and severely damaging a third. The story spread quickly through the division. Few could believe that a fragile, fabric-skinned plane had taken out heavy German armor that had terrorized Europe for years. From that day forward, the nickname Bazooka Charlie became legend. Throughout the remainder of the Battle of Aracourt, September 18, 1944, Carpenter continued flying daring missions. Taking advantage of the fog and low terrain, he often approached targets at treetop level. According to combat records, in just 1 week he flew more than 40 sorties, surviving multiple hits that tore holes in his wings and fuselage. He attacked not only tanks, but also trucks, supply points, and columns of German infantry moving along rural roads. His most dramatic action came on September 25th, when German forces launched their largest counterattack of the campaign. A dozen Panthers and Panzer L-4s surged through the valley near Luneville, attempting to cut off the American line. Carpenter and 2 fellow observation pilots took off to scout the movement, but when he saw the sheer weight of German armor below, he decided to attack head-on. Diving twice, he fired all 6 rockets, destroying at least 1 Panther and 2 armored vehicles, according to U.S. artillery observers. Shrapnel ripped through Rosie's frame, shaking the plane violently, but Carpenter somehow managed to nurse it back to base, on a single remaining wheel. His exploits electrified American morale. Reports of a tank-killing bazooka pilot spread rapidly across Lorraine. U.S. newspapers, including Stars and Stripes and the New York Herald Tribune, hailed him as the man who turned a reconnaissance plane into a tank destroyer. War correspondents dubbed him the Mad Major, a title that captured both his fearlessness and his embodiment of American ingenuity in the Field. Major General John S. Wood, commander of the 4th Armored Division, personally sent a commendation to Carpenter and recommended him for the Silver Star for gallantry. Headquarters reports credited him with destroying or disabling at least 6 German tanks during the Aracourt campaign, along with several vehicles and gun emplacements. Some wartime newspapers inflated the tally to as many as 14 tanks, an exaggeration perhaps, but one that spoke to his mythic status among soldiers. Whatever the exact number, few doubted that Carpenter's achievements pushed the boundaries of what air power and imagination could accomplish. The influence of Rosie the Rocketer went far beyond the physical damage it inflicted. Before Aracourt, German troops routinely ignored the tiny L-4s buzzing overhead, assuming they were harmless spotter planes. After Carpenter's attacks, that changed overnight. Every sighting of a Piper in the sky now drew immediate fire. German units even diverted light flak guns to target them. Ironically, this paranoia worked to the Allies' advantage, forcing German troops to disperse their fire and weakening their overall combat effectiveness. By the end of the Aracourt fighting, Carpenter had become a living legend across the Lorraine front. Young pilots saw him as the model of daring. Ground troops regarded him as a guardian angel overhead. One artillery officer later recalled, "Whenever we saw that little Piper with 6 bazookas under its wings, we knew hell was about to rain down on the Krauts." The Battle of Aracourt ended in a decisive American victory. Patton's 4th Armored Division and supporting forces destroyed more than 280 German tanks and armored vehicles while losing only about 25 of their own. Despite the mud, fog, and fuel shortages, the win showcased the superb coordination between reconnaissance, artillery, and tactical air support. Within that grand victory, Carpenter's personal feats, however small in scale, embodied the creative boldness and fighting spirit that defined the American soldier. As autumn deepened over Lorraine and the fields of Aracourt fell silent once more, the sky still echoed with the hum of the little L-4s, but now no one dared to call them harmless. Somewhere up there, the memory of Bazooka Charlie diving through smoke and gunfire to strike a column of German tanks lived on. A reminder that in the crucible of war, human will and imagination could sometimes outmatch even the mightiest machines. As the guns gradually fell silent over Europe in the spring of 1945, Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter left the battlefield with a reputation far beyond that of an ordinary reconnaissance pilot. The American press had hailed him as the man who declared war on German tanks single-handedly, a symbol of ingenuity and courage within the U.S. Army. But to Carpenter, war was never a legend to boast about. It was a heavy chain of memories, woven with pride and pain. After Germany's surrender, he returned to the United States with the temporary rank of lieutenant colonel, carrying a few minor wounds and a weary heart. During the war, Carpenter had flown more than 500 reconnaissance missions and directly attacked enemy tanks, convoys, and artillery positions dozens of times. He was awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Air Medal with oak leaf clusters, high honors for extraordinary bravery. Yet Carpenter never saw himself as a hero. In a 1945 interview, he said simply, "I just did what needed to be done to protect my buddies. If I could make the Germans afraid of a little observation plane, then it was worth it." Returning to his hometown of Decatur, Illinois, Carpenter resumed his former profession, teaching. His students adored him not just for his knowledge, but for his humility and warmth. Few could imagine that the gentle teacher with the quiet smile had once flown a fabric-covered plane barely above the ground to destroy German tanks. He rarely spoke of the war, and when he did, his voice was calm, his eyes distant. One colleague recalled, he wasn't proud of how many enemies he killed. He was proud of how many people he kept alive. In the years after the war, Carpenter lived simply, teaching, planting trees, and spending time with his family. But his body, worn down by stress and wartime exposure, began to fail. In 1966, he died at the age of 53 after a battle with Hodgkin's lymphoma. His passing was quiet, far from the roar of his wartime fame. On his modest headstone in an Illinois cemetery, the inscription reads, "Charles Carpenter, Major, U.S. Army Air Corps, 1912-1966. Yet the legacy of Bazooka Charlie did not fade with him. The story of the reconnaissance pilot who turned his Piper L-4 Grasshopper into an attack aircraft lived on in military academies and aviation history books. To many analysts, Carpenter was a pioneer of the modern attack helicopter concept, using small, agile aircraft armed with anti-tank weapons to support ground troops. What he did through instinct and courage would later evolve into the design philosophy behind the AH-1 Cobra and AH-64 Apache. In fact, Carpenter's legendary plane, Rosie the Rocketer, had its own remarkable journey after the war. When he left Europe, the aircraft was abandoned at a makeshift airfield in Austria. For decades it lay forgotten, rusting away in an old hangar, until 2017, when an aviation restoration group in Europe discovered a surviving frame marked 433426, matching Carpenter's aircraft records. Over 3 years, with support from the American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts and Carpenter's daughter, Carol, Rosie was painstakingly restored. By 2020, Rosie the Rocketer had been fully rebuilt, repainted in its original camouflage, and placed on display at the American Heritage Museum. On its fuselage, the small inscription, "Rosie the Rocketer, Magier C. Carpenter," remains exactly as it appeared in 1944. When the museum opened the exhibit, hundreds of veterans and history enthusiasts attended, including men who had once fought in Lorraine. One former Sherman gunner, his voice trembling, recalled, "We looked up and saw him diving through the smoke. That's when we knew. It wasn't just tanks that could win battles. Courage could fly too." Carpenter's legacy has since been revived in popular culture. Articles, documentaries, and history books continue to refer to him as the world's first bazooka pilot. In 2023, his daughter Carol Carpenter and journalist Eric Nelson published Bazooka Charlie, the unbelievable story of Major Charles Carpenter and Rosie the Rocketer, recounting his life through letters, diaries, and military records. The book not only resurrects the image of a forgotten hero, but also honors a generation that believed creativity and courage could change history. Today, visitors to the Massachusetts Museum can look up and see Rosie suspended in the air, a small, fragile wooden plane with 6 bazooka tubes mounted under its wings. Bathed in soft golden light, Rosie the Rocketer seems ready to take off once more toward an unseen enemy. Beside it, a simple yet powerful placard reads, "A schoolteacher took a bazooka to the skies and changed how the world thought about war." The story of Charles Carpenter stands as timeless proof that war is not decided solely by massive machines, but by the intellect and courage of ordinary individuals who dare to think differently. In an age when technology dominates the battlefield, his legacy reminds us that sometimes what truly makes the difference is not size or firepower, but the will to defy limits. And so, more than 80 years after the flames of Lorraine, the name Charles Carpenter still echoes in flight schools, history classrooms, and in the hearts of those who believe that, no matter how small, human courage can still make steel bow.